smarter impact is about going beyond ourselves, our work, and our communities. It's about enabling better choices that make a difference in people's lives. And recognizing that everything is connected. To make a smarter impact, we must be knowledge-led, human-centric, and optimistic. Ready to make a smarter impact? Talk with our team or visit our website to learn how.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cracking the Code, innovating within a non-innovative ecosystem to get to immersive learning and environments and zero energy. I welcome you guys today. We believe we have a very powerful story to tell you about of a project that we've been involved, and that the lessons from this project are applicable anywhere in the United States and abroad. So we think that the relevance of this project to districts and to designers and planners throughout would be very valuable to you. Today we want to introduce ourselves. So my name is Tomas Eliasson. I'm a design principal for learning environments and schools and K-12, college and U at Little Diversified Architectural Consulting with about 22 years of experience designing schools. Philip?
Hi, I'm Philip Donovan. I'm technical principal with Little, work alongside Tomas. And I've got about 15 years experience in designing high performance buildings. Mike.
And I'm Mike Meechan. I'm the current principal at Neo City Academy and was the planning principal during design and construction of the facility as well. I've got about 17 years of experience in the education space, so using the amazing facilities that Tomas and Philip design and build.
So we wanted to quickly go through the agenda of how we're going to present today. We want to touch on the why, what vision for learning in the future. We'll touch then on the how we created an innovative project within a non-innovative ecosystem. We'll define a little bit of innovation. We'll show you our understanding of what the vision was for design drivers for both the project and learning, understanding what parameters we had to play with, and creating a sense of an investigative learning place. Then we'll move on to the what, kind of what we actually ended up with, the creative part of it, and how we ended up with an immersive learning environment that is also a zero energy environment. We'll touch at the end a little bit on results of the project. I'm going to let Mike speak to the why for this project.
All right, Tomas, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. But we always like to talk about why we do things and why they're important. And Neo City Academy, we're a STEM-focused magnet school. We know that STEM-related, fields and workforce that is out there is constantly evolving. But then we look at our K-12 education system, and we don't quite keep up with the current pace of iteration. So, we know that there's a demand and a desire to build these schools that really meet the needs of what it is that we do inside these buildings. You can go ahead to the next slide, Tomas. So, Jamie Cassip, who's an evangelist for Google Education, talks about, this quote where, our students have adapted and grown in the education system, that we can no longer ask students what they want to be when they grow up. We instead need to ask them, what problems that they want to tackle and that they want to solve. The reason being is that we know that Google updates their search engine 600 times over the course of a year. So we know if that's the pace of iteration, that the world around our students is moving exponentially faster and faster and faster. And we need to be able to keep up. And we need to be able to build learning environments that are immersive, that are flexible, and that meet the demands of what students will see, both in the post-secondary setting, but also, when they move into the immersive workplace. You can go ahead to the next slide. So, SpaceX is a great example for this. Our school is located about 45 miles from the coast where SpaceX launches rockets, and then within 30 minutes returns a phase one rocket booster to back to Earth. And we know that that's the work that we have to prepare our students for, and it's constantly evolving. So, how do we embrace a school culture and build a facility that facilitates, design thinking and experimental learning, and is really flexible, so that as the world adapts around us, we're able to adapt in the educational space as well. Those things are really, really important. So, we think we've done that. We've done that in terms of how we operate at NeoCity Academy. And it really ties into our mission. If you can go to the next slide, Tomas, where our school's mission is to find students that believe that can have an impact on the world. Well, we've really been purposeful in designing and building a school facility that really enhances the type of curriculum and pedagogy that happens on this campus. I think as we kind of move through this presentation, you're really going to see that Tomas and Philip have really worked in the design process to build a very special environment. And at the end, we're going to close out with some of the things that our students have been working on, to be able to really enhance learning. So it's a very unique learning environment we're going to be able to talk about today. Next slide. So some of our partners that we've been able to work with because of the uniqueness of this, this space, no pun intended, but is NASA and companies like Blue Origin. We actually we just released yesterday, actually, a press release yesterday with a new partnership with NASA, Blue Origin, and a company called IMEC, which actually lives here in this same technology neighborhood called NeoCity that we live in. But we're actually going to be sending student experiments, 2 of them, into space. So, it's really about us, living that mission on a very unique campus, and then we've got other great partnerships with folks in the post-secondary world, schools like Northwestern University, University of Central Florida, University of Texas at El Paso, that we're really excited about, as we kind of explore, what teaching and learning looks like truly in the 21st century. So, Tomas, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mike. So we're going to show a little bit about how we got to that spot where we could design a building given the vision that the school district had. And first, I want to touch a little bit on innovation, because it's not easy to do. And this diagram shows the reality that in order to innovate, we have to have an innovative organization followed with an innovative team of committed leaders, as well as innovative individuals, in this case, teachers and students, that the day-to-day have those skills to constantly be looking for the next thing and being passionate about it. And if in any other situation, any of these 3 components is not present, it's really hard to innovate. So, we found Osceola County to be a district that wanted to innovate. We had the leadership that wanted to push it. And we have teachers and students that are doing it and practicing every day. So it is actually resulted in a fantastic project. But part of it too is this kind of what we've been talking about over the years is this augmentation of the student experience. And if you look at it from the way that experience mapping occurs, and this is an exercise that usually tends to occur in retail practice, but you need to find those pain points, those moments in a student's life, whether they are at home or in the school, where we can elevate their experience from being actually a pain point to being a success. And maybe, Mike, I ask you to maybe talk a little bit about maybe a couple of moments where you see students that are kind of experiencing something different than what they did before in a kind of traditional kind of environment of learning.
Yeah, I mean, going from a traditional, traditional school to the facility that we've built, everybody that comes and visits our campus, we know we did it right when they walk in and they say, this doesn't really look like our school or feel like a school. It really feels open. It feels like either post-secondary or an immersive workplace environment. likened to to companies like Google and to Amazon, or even little, in your home office. But it really has, it requires some redesign of curriculum. It requires some redesign of well, we've always done it this way, or we've always we're very good at that in the K-12 setting for saying that this is what we've always done. We're not going to do it any different. It's very easy to build a prototype school and build many of those throughout a school district. And the question as the educator in me would be like, is that the best thing for students? And is that really going to meet the needs of this 21st century learner that we are graduating from schools across the country? And the answer is no, it's not. It's not easy. It requires a lot of like-minded folks in the leadership, and people that are willing to really push the envelope. Tomas, we consider ourselves here at NeoCity a disruptor of status quo. We really believe in shaking the system at its foundational core. And, this has really been the perfect storm of getting some really great, like-minded folks together in a room that have really pushed the thinking. I mean, in Osceola County, we're not known for being, traditionally progressive. And our school board, I thank them a lot for taking the step and the giant leap to really move forward in how we move education as a system, forward. And I think it speaks to some of the pain points that we did go through. Is, it's okay to think differently. It requires extra work. It requires some headaches along the way, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we come out with something that is really good for kids, and that's what's most important.
Thank you, Mike. So we just wanted to touch also on the Innovation Biome, a book by Kumar Mehta, and a couple of quotes from that book. The biome provides the settings and conditions that determine what flourishes and what dies in a kind of a natural environment. So in an innovation biome, we take that to an experience, is a learning environment that lets innovation flourish. So we need to set up those rules within the environment to let this innovation process happen. And what you hear from Mike's words and the way the district kind of took a stab at this is that they were trying to create this biome, a place, as Mehta also says, that the innovation is a replicable and consistent activity. Then it is important for students to understand how to get better at improving themselves. So it's a process, and it's not the ends to the mean. It's just an understanding the process and how innovation happens within this biome. So we wanted to design a biome of sorts where those kind of experiences could happen. And so that's kind of what we try to do. We want to touch a little bit on understanding the vision of the school, because it was important that they were so visionary. They have huge goals for this project, and not always you find a client that tries to seek these goals. On the screen, you see what became the design drivers, and there were many design drivers within it, and they were all as exciting as the next, right? But the two that became most important, number one and number two, were how to create an immersive learning environment where collaboration, 21st century skills, and active learning happens on a daily basis. And two, a high performance building facility with the hopeful approach to making it a zero energy building. Everything you see below, there were great goals, and we tried to make it flexible, adaptable, efficient, and effective. Have the partnerships, as Mike was talking about, bring a EUI to about 20 so we could make it high performance and push for zero energy. Philip will touch on that a little bit in coming slides, but also use the building as a teaching tool as much as possible too, because it's a STEM building after all. In terms
Tomas,
of programming,
if I can just jump in real quick on the team kept immersive learning environment number one, and it really never moved from that spot. And what we often tell visitors as they come, and Philip was a driver of this and really keeping us grounded in these design drivers, but we never deviated from keeping the learning environment front and center. And we oftentimes build schools without any involvement of what is actually going to happen in the school. And if we're going to change how we build educational facilities, we have to understand what is going to happen in them first. And I'm not just talking about just teaching and learning, right? It has to be about how's the building going to be used, and always they allowed for a teaching and learning voice to be present at the table the entire time, and really kept that front and center. And I truly believe that we would not have had the same outcomes. Not only is it a beautiful educational facility, but it is a very purposeful education facility to meet our needs on the teaching and learning side. We just would not have done that. We have to change how we design schools with giving teaching and learning a voice in those design drivers, because that's what we're doing. We're producing learning facilities, for kids. And if we don't have a voice for the teaching and learning side, we're going to miss the mark every single time.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm going to let you speak to programming a little bit too on this.
Yeah, so we chunked it. We had this phase one idea. We had the school board had put in parameters in place for us to develop a high school. We knew that we obviously had, we had a certain square footage that we needed to work within because we had budget constraints, and we knew that we wanted to have about 125 students per grade level, 500 students total. And the design drivers in terms of what we were going to do within the facility, we knew based on the Florida 2030 jobs report, we knew that the fields of engineering, biomedical engineering, and cybersecurity were going to be big workforce opportunities for our students. So those were, driving factors as we were developing curriculum. And then we're hopeful at some point to move on to phase two and open the middle school as well. We knew that going into the process what sciences we were going to offer students, which obviously was important for the types of labs that we were going to develop. Obviously building a very unique lab environments for our three areas, our cybersecurity, our biodesign, and our engineering was also very important as well. We also started on a temporary campus as we were able to really vet out the design process and thinking, for the ultimate campus that we moved into. So, and we continue to make that work in years 2, 3, and 4.
So we also, obviously, as you all understand, we always try to innovate, but our environments tend to be non-innovative, and in this case, we try to listen to goals and objectives from a district that is trying to push to a new way of doing things. But we are also regulated by the state requirements of the educational facilities to maintain and deal with an EdSpec as you all do. And when we looked at the EdSpec, there were all kinds of requirements, and there were only so many spaces that we could address as a way to create an immersive experience. So what you see highlighted in yellow are the type of spaces we could do. And there wasn't a lot of variety on the kind of spaces that we could accomplish, and kind of the amount of square footage, prescriptive square footage that each occupant would have, right? So we would have to choose from a classroom, a science demonstration lab, a science lab, kind of an open area, a flex space, and kind of a couple of resource rooms and itinerary rooms. So this was kind of the rules, right? We're trying to innovate within these rules that are fairly strict and that are not meant to support this immersive kind of concept. So again, we were playing with that data. We knew we had to be within the parameters. But there was also a kind of a learning kind of paradigm, right? That wanted to be met. So we worked with the district in terms of understanding the curriculum framework for each of these Project Lead the Way majors of sorts, from engineering, cybersecurity, and bioengineering. And each of them have a capstone, a curriculum that framework that highlights a capstone, and that capstone has the ideas of applying knowledge, right? So the idea is that you are planning and with an advisor how to get there, that you do oral presentations, that you making your learning visible to others, And we gather through looking at these documents, those ideas and how to kind of make those come to life in the environment and be supported by the environment. Similarly, there were some common core and standards that we wanted to maintain, but in yellow, you see highlighted the kinds of words that were being used. And this was hard to meet on a regular standard facility. He was calling for a new way of thinking about how the spaces can support these kind of skills that these kids will be practicing day in, day out throughout the life of their high school. So as you can see, they became the design drivers for learning, cross-disciplinary, design thinking, being self-driven, and giving them the power for these students to pick their space within the building and have the authority and the agency to select where they want to study and how they want to study, to support teamwork and teamwork specific spaces, to support this idea of mentorship and supervision and guide. And obviously all the skills, 21st century skills and everything else that goes with it. So as you can see on the screen, and this was obviously the nature and the art and science of looking at how we looked at the framework, the course sequencing for each of these majors, and the idea that there will be this mix, right? Is this matrix of how many students per class, how many classrooms there are going to be, how many boxes are we going to have, what is the time that students are going to spend on these places, what is the capacity for each of these classrooms given how many courses they're going to take, percentages of time that students are spending on what type of learning environment, and how much time they spend on virtual learning versus in-person learning. So there was a lot to digest and unpack. And these were kind of designed to think that, for example, in this diagram, we have a core where students will take about 17 courses at core, but they'll take 16 courses on pathway, which is kind of what you see in green. And then we broke it down into these components and what kind of space was needed for each of these courses. We did the same with biomedical engineering, as you can see on the screen, and it kind of yielded certain types of percentages of time and space that were dedicated to those. And we did the same with cybersecurity, thinking about how that would work. That yielded the fact that we needed about 20 boxes, but these 20 boxes were in the typical, 800 square foot classrooms or the 1200 square foot labs. They varied depending on how students were going to take these courses, and it kind of yielded this idea of how much percentage of space is needed given the specific activity and the skills that we're trying to accomplish. So this is kind of how we start to break it down and start to work with creating a program in a very short time. And similar here, you start to see the breakdown of the various components and what kind of the needs are, and starting to diagram what these spaces wanted to do in order to achieve these skills within the spaces. And then we also broke it into kind of modules. So we kind of broke it down to that idea of creating these almost neighborhoods that could have this mix and this variety of spaces where learning happens, and it provides the flexibility and adaptability to move through the space and for students to select where they want to be. And we'll show you pictures of that as we move through. So that's kind of our final program. It's a little blurry, but you kind of get the gist. We're about 45,000, a little plus in square footage, grossing factor about 35%. Typical school, but when you start to see how it's laid out inside, you'll see the difference. And again, we were staying to the Florida SREF requirements for labs and classrooms. Another thing that we wanted to touch as well were the parameters set forth by the site. And I'll jump on this quickly, but NeoCity is a new technical, new urbanist kind of development that will occur over time. This is a design that was created by Perkins and Will a few years back, and that the idea would be that eventually all these buildings that you see on the screen would be occupied by high-tech companies and will be developed over time to create a kind of a work learn type of environment for people. So when you see the lake to the bottom right, and to the right of that is where our school is situated. And if we zoom into that area, we were given kind of basically that site where you see two boxes on the bottoms, the center, with all the parking areas. And the mandates of the district, New Urbanist District, was for the footprints of the buildings to be on the street by about 60% of the footprint. So that was a big mandate, and knowing that we wanted to do a zero energy high performance building, it wasn't necessarily the best orientation with one of the main facades facing southwest to the Florida sun. But that was a mandate, so we had to stay to where that was and kind of maintain those ideas. Again, this was a test fit, but it wasn't the final. But you see the two buildings on that side, one being the middle school, one being the high school. High school to the northwest, and school to the middle school to the south east in the future. And then quickly, the site was 5 acres. We needed buses for 12 bus loops for 12 buses, 600 linear feet of stacking drop off, and a lot of parking in the early stages of the project, but also phase 2. And so those were kind of the parameters in terms of site conditions. So we took all that, goals, objectives, site constraints, ed specs, and kind of frameworks of the curriculum, and we started diagramming. And what you see on the screen is kind of a module diagram, but it was a way to diagram how the learning could happen given this variety of spaces, this immersive learning environment experience. And what you see is kind of a framework in which there is a kind of a hallway with a clean bar to the north, with classrooms and some diversity of spaces, and then having a central kind of spine that supports this kind of impart spaces, create spaces, these immersive learning environments with a very flexible science and fab lab to the south of it. And this becomes almost like a roadmap that became very, very similar to what we ended up in the very end of the project. We played with various diagrams, and now you see sketches with the way we were trying to mitigate this idea that the building had to be oriented to that slanted northwest, east, southeast Broadway to 60% of its footprint, but with the goal of how to respond to sustainability and to solar orientation as much as possible. So what you see on the middle top was a diagram that became the kind of the winning diagram. What you see here on the screen with the green zone, this kind of a dash zone on the right side, which becomes the main student flex space, is our hearth, is our flex environment where all kinds of things happen. Lunch happens there, media happens there, student study space happens there, presentations happen there. And what you see then in blue are these mega labs. In orange, you start to see classrooms, and in red, you see administration as a secure point of entry into the school. That yielded a more developed plan. In this case, we were trying to play with the plan and then trying to fit the middle school into the side. As you can see, it was a little too long, so we have to readjust. Again, we were test fitting how to put both faces, same footprint was the goal from the district, to have exactly the same footprint, by one being middle school while being high school within the same site. So for effectiveness and efficiency of cost. And then kind of the way that we were starting to mass the building in terms of having a 3-story north bar and having a 2-story south bar that kind of cranked to respond to this solar orientation as much as we could, given the constraints. Similarly, along the way, we've been obviously speaking about how to learn for the imagination and innovation economy and the importance of technology, thinking about learning for tomorrow, wellness, and neuroscience in this process of learning. And we want to touch quickly on a couple of items that respond to neuroscience and wellness, because they were very critical to the way that design happened and the way the planning happened on the project. In terms of the neuroscience and learning, and again, I'm not going to go into a big, deep lesson on neuroscience and learning, but the more we understand about the learning brain, the more we understand that we need to cater to it. We need to understand how that happens and how it affects children in their process of learning. We've referenced many times Dr. Willis's Ignite Learning, Benedict Carey, How We Learn, and Dr. Souza's Mind Brain Education, and the lessons that we learn from their writings about how spaces affect learning. And one thing that was very interesting is in this process of learning and memorization, this somatosensory cortex of the brain is broken into areas, and each area is in charge of recording a different sense of that student experience. So if there is an experience that has sense and hearing and smelling and tactile components and visual components to it, each element of that will be recorded in a different part of the brain. So the idea is, how do you correlate those experiences? What kind of experience, learning experience, can support a better association of those learning moments, right? So as Judy Willis says in her book, in the classroom, the more ways the material is to be learned and introduced, the brain will review it, and the more dendrites, pathways will be accessed and created. So basically, the more we create an active learning experience where students are touching, smelling, manipulating, listening, and seeing at the same time, the better that and more in-depth that experience will be. So we wanted to create an environment where students are doing exactly that, actively learning through the process, which was part of the goals as well from the district. And also in terms of student learning and wellness, I wanted to touch on the idea of mental health and mental wellness, because we are learning more and more the importance that creating a community has on students and on their well-being. And I think we're seeing that through COVID right now, and the isolation of students. And when they come together, especially teenagers in high school, they're so social that creating an environment where that community is elevated and enhanced can really support a much stronger learning process. Similarly, the idea that we need to be connected to nature, that in our evolutionary memory, we need to be seeing daylighting in nature and outside. So we try to make the building as open as possible, given our parameters, obviously of cost, but try to have it so that students could be able to look outside and be conditioned to be looking out, and between breaks being able to get daylighting as well, and being able to go outside as much as possible. Also, the way that our brain is constantly looking for spatial variety. Those novelty neurons in our brain are looking for what's new. They get tired very quickly when they see the same thing over and over and over. So for us to make transparency being an important thing, so we can see what's going on in spaces, have white walls where students can see what's being written and explored in their student process, was very important to do. So we wanted to bring that out and allow students to, again, choose spaces where they felt like they wanted to learn, given their daily conditions and their tasks at hand. And finally, the idea of active learning and movement. And we know that the more students move, the more that blood floods to their brain. So the idea of creating not necessarily pedals on tables, but the idea that students can choose their space and move throughout the building and have that choice and that agency to pick their space was really important for their well-being. So with that said, we want to touch now on the what and what we created. And what we wanted to highlight is, again, those two big priorities that came out of the visioning. Number one, to create Florida's first immersive LearningSCAPE. And number two, to create Florida's first zero energy school. I will touch on some of the immersive learning components with Mike, and then I will Philip touch on all the zero energy strategies that we went through the project to get to that point. So again, this doesn't have to cost more. This doesn't have to be more complicated. This project was done under the typical conventional construction that is used by every single project in the school district and in Central Florida. Tilt-up concrete, punched openings, simple roofing, nothing very complicated, but it's really in the details, and Philip will touch on that in later slides. So again, it doesn't have to cost more. This came within the cost per square foot and the cost per student station requested and mandated by the state of Florida. And we were able to achieve these things by, again, looking carefully at everything that we did in the project. We were also inspired by what was going to happen inside and what these kids are doing. this district at New York City, it's about high-tech corridors that will have photonics companies, that will have nanocarbon and high-tech companies, and we wanted to somehow bring that into the building to kind of create a little bit of an excitement when you look at this building. It's a little bit different from anything else. And so you can see how nanocarbon tubes and the structures of nanocarbons became the inspiration for the screens, that orange screen that you see on the right side, and these hexagonal elements that are replicated in multiple areas included in the interior of the building, such as lighting fixtures and carpets. And we also looked at circuitry as a way to kind of create these grooves on the precast concrete, so that there was kind of a playfulness to the exterior, that it wasn't stiff and it wasn't boring either. Create a little bit of an excitement place for students to come to. And obviously, we're in a climate that we felt daylight and energy harvesting was a must. And we achieved that, as you can see from top right images, through screening, getting great daylighting into the spaces, lots of flooding it with north light, but also controlling the south light, as you see on the bottom screen, where we use Calwall to insulate daylighting, diffuse it in the inside, and then use a canopy, a solar canopy, to shade and provide lunch spaces for students, while at the same time shading the windows. And those kind of solar canopies became even this kind of outdoor canopy that led to a drive school food truck that will stop here for students to grab their lunch. So we use that as a way to power the food trucks as well. And as you can see on the planning, the way that we're starting to explore it earlier, but the central core, what we call the mixer, this middle space that becomes a very flex space, full of activities from presentations to food, to independent study space. And then you have the academic, the administrative component to the right, with classrooms above them. And then you have all the labs to the left, with a lot of immersive learning typology spaces, from think spaces to create spaces. And that's kind of what we start to see on this image here, how we started to break the immersive learning ideas throughout the building and sprinkle them throughout the building, so they will be connected to the learning elements, so the students can pull out and do an independent study element or a team project. But that these typologies, the impart, the things, the create spaces, were accessible both from classrooms and hallways, so that they could be very efficient and they could be utilized by anybody in the building at any given moment. So again, we're finding utilization as a really important tool for the project. And what you start to see here is the way that this the spaces start to work. Think space, as you see on the top left, where students kind of can come in a small space. They have a laptop. They bring it with them. They have a plug-in screen. They do have white screens where they can write on, work as a team. And then you see similarly discover spaces, which are big labs, impart spaces that are tier environments. We'll touch on that in a second. These create team spaces that are connected to the labs and to the corridors, and exchange spaces with the idea that this learning happens anywhere and everywhere. So we'll quickly touch on a couple of things. And Mike, I'll let you speak to this as well, but you start to see think areas, areas where students can focus and have great daylighting, so they're connected again to the outside and to the place. And Mike, could you talk a little bit about how students use these think spaces?
Yeah, so Tomas, these are great collaborative spaces for our students. It's a little bit, one of the craziest things when you come onto our campus is that you will literally see kids everywhere. They're using all of the spaces at any given time. We may have students in an English class that may be meeting in what we, these boxes that we call learning environments. But you may have students that are also in English class, broken out or using one of our lab spaces like you see here, in our engineering lab. This is one of our, 2,000 plus square foot lab spaces. Again, nothing is hidden away in our facility. Everything is out in the open. We put the tools out for students to be able to use and to see where, oftentimes you'll see lots of cabinets and you'll see lots of storage in schools, and we'll put the robotics equipment away and we'll put the science materials away, but kids aren't going to use them. We have to really open up the idea and really make flexible environments. You can go to the next. So like, this is what a typical classroom on our campus looks like, where we've got these different types of furniture, tables that can be broken apart and made into smaller tables or put together and make larger tables. And we're a one-to-one environment. Our students work on laptops, so the importance for them to be able to plug in and practice a presentation or work collaboratively on a PowerPoint together with their group. Those things were really important as well. And then also giving them space to be able to break out. Almost everything on our campus is a lot of open concepts, but sometimes students need to huddle in smaller groups or work on problems or practice presentations or even study for an exam. And we've built spaces for them to be able to huddle and do those things as well. And then, we're able to, again, with these lab spaces, you can see we put power on the ceilings, again, really maximizing flexibility in these spaces to be able to, move a lab environment that traditionally may not be able to, because, you're isolated to where the power's at. But, with us having the flexibility and being able to move some of those things, we're really able to shift and adapt the shape of a lab for whatever it is we're using it for.
And back to those ideas on neuroscience, the idea of this spatial variety that we can see through, as you can see in this image, through the glass, into a room, through the glass to the hallway and beyond to the green spaces. So nature and daylighting is always connected to the learning space throughout, and obviously bringing some vibrant color and materials is kind of always fun, and kind of the natural biophilic color of wood expressed through doors and tabletops and so on.
Yeah, and also, the ability, our Impart space is a great example of very smart use of square footage. Maximizing square footage in this particular space was really important. So for us to be able to meet with a class in a much smaller footprint by not putting any furniture in the room and allowing, them to sit on stadium seating, really, really we're able to maximize, the use of the space. We use these spaces to kind of break out and huddle up, or even video conference, with someone on the other side of the globe.
And what I love about what the leadership of the school has created, and Mike obviously leading that, is the fact that students, like in this image, they're coaching each other, they're teaching each other, that they can be seen, obviously working, and that there is a sense of transparency so teachers can keep an eye on them. But there is a sense of agency, there is a sense of ownership that the students take of their space. That many times we've designed these kind of spaces and the leadership hasn't supported that, and they tend to sit empty. But here, it just feels like it's always being used, and they're encouraged to do so.
I think this we refer to this as an exchange, and I think this is probably one of my favorite parts of this school. And it really is an unintended consequence, but we've built really comfortable spaces. And what will happen on our campus, which is really a sign of success, is that our teachers and students work collaboratively next to one another. So you may see a group of students working on a project next to a group of teachers who are planning their curriculum in the same space. And that does not happen in schools. We oftentimes our educators are working in silos. They stay in their classroom and they don't interact with their colleagues, and more importantly, with their students. But to see teams of students working next to teams of teachers in the same comfortable space is incredible. As an educator, that's when it really has come to meet some of our design drivers for sure.
Fantastic. It's nice to hear from the point of view of the users. So now, and here you see a little bit of the school culture. These are pictures from Instagram. NeoCity is fantastic about posting what the school students do. And as you can see, they're just taking full ownership. Obviously, this is pre-COVID, but they take full ownership of the spaces and how they have seem to have a lot of fun in the space. We also wanted to touch on the second aspect of this, which was a high performance and zero energy design of the school, since it was the first zero energy school in the state of Florida. So I'm going to let Philip carry on this segment of the presentation.
Sure, thanks, Tomas. I'll just go back thinking about some of those images that we showed previously. We got to have some fun with it as designers as well. So not just exposing structure, but the cow wall, if you noticed, had a white and blue pattern to it. Well, we hid the Fibonacci series and the rhythm of those panels, and you know that, and we had our lighting fixtures in that space. If you saw those, were in the shape of chemical compounds. And I told Mike, I said, the first student that figures what these chemical compounds are, I'll buy them lunch. And so last year somebody did, they figured it all out. It's creatine, adenine. It's the things that chemical compounds that relate to our health and wellness, our brain health and wellness. And so our electrical engineers got to have fun with it. I said, man, pick out some chemical compounds and hide them in there. And I had lunch with a student, and it was awesome. So we get to, when we talk about immersive learning, it just doesn't have to stop at a color or pattern or the concept of physical space. It can be about where things are just subtly intervened into the space as well. So it's a tall order, right? Creating a school all about immersive learning, actually shifting the way in which we design space and program for a school. Oh, and let's make it zero energy at the same time, right? But actually the two go hand in hand. And as you saw in those previous pictures, when we begin to expose these high performance systems, the kids really get excited about them. They get immersed. You know, there's an inverter for a photovoltaic system sitting on the wall. Well, why is that? We're not going to tell you, right? Why don't you go and figure it out and come back and you tell us? Because we're probably going to learn some about that as well. But at the end of the day, those same students are inheriting a planet that is in bad shape. You know, in whatever way you lean on the political spectrum, we have to start making a shift, because global resource attrition is creating a catalytic shift in a way we have to design and construct buildings. And so, you know, like, just like NeoCity uses Instagram, we use hash signs, right? Hashtag shift happens. And that's what's happening here. So it's not a passing trend, right? So this isn't something that we're as designers are excited about and trying to push off on somebody else. 89% of Americans are very concerned about the environment, and 93% of them agree that saving energy helps the environment. So we're taking those steps, right? We're trying to create a zero-sum game. We also know there's a devastating risk if we do nothing. And data is mounting that. It's not just about new schools, right? We talk about, well, this is easy to do in new schools. It's also about the way we operate buildings and the way we retrofit existing. There's trillions of dollars in risk for existing buildings, and we can tackle those problems just the same way we tackle something in new construction. And why does it matter? Where's the data? Well, our energy use, we use about 40% of energy use in the US goes to our buildings, both residential and commercial. And 36% of those those buildings contribute to the CO2 emissions. So in this school district, 90% of their utility costs are electricity. It's not water, it's not gas, it's electricity to power those buildings. We also know that high performance equals health and wellness. They are in balance with each other. And as Tomas stated earlier, we look for biophilic approaches to design. We know that our ancient brain developed in nature. And so when we have a response to even just patterns in vinyl floor tile, that wood patterns or the color blue or green, it creates a cognitive snap in our brain, and it makes us feel better. It calms us. It creates a wellness and a learning opportunity in our brains. And so we immerse our public spaces in the material palettes just like that. We also know, everybody knows CO2 is bad for us. It's poison, right? If you start hyperventilating, you breathe into a paper bag. Why? Because it's poisoning your brain. It's telling it it's shutting it down so that you stop overreacting. Well, nobody really knew how much. And so in 1990, there was a report done by the Compressed Gas Association that said up to 10,000 parts per million and on is fine. for exposure to humans. In 2000, a report came out by the EPA that there were no reported symptoms under 20,000 parts per million of CO2. So when NASA set out to send people into space for a longer period of time, these were the only things they had to focus on when they were trying to figure out, well, how much CO2 is bad for somebody living in a contained foil box for an indefinite amount of time. So they started doing their own studies, and what they found was that they noticed. So we heard from EPA and Gas Association that 10 to 20,000 was okay. So they set a fudge factor, and they said, well, we'll set 7,000 as our bar, no higher than 7,000. Well, they found that at 5,000, astronauts stopped following procedure. I mean, procedure is everything in an environment like that. They noted headaches, and as they continued to drop, those symptoms were still around. Well, there's schools out there that are at 2,500, 3,000 and climbing parts per million, and we're asking our students to sit down and focus and take tests, and we're not giving them the ventilation that we need. We also know that acoustic performance of a space has impacts on the way students learn, the way teachers teach, the way we even just pay attention. And so we know that we can go in and do studies on classroom sound levels before and after, and just reducing those increases cognition and increases learning outcomes. We also know that ancient ape brain has a connection to the sun and the movement of the sun, the diurnal cycle, right? It's why our iPhone shift has a night shift, right? They get warmer at night because it's telling our brain it's time to slow down. When we look at a cold light at night, it's telling our brain to wake up. So we have the ability now with LEDs, they're everywhere, they're pervasive, to actually begin to tune lighting in our spaces. So when we get those high school kids in the morning and they're really sleepy, we can make the light a little colder and wake their brain up. Alternatively, when we have a K-5 student that comes in after lunch and is wound up, we can make the light a little warmer. And but we can also just have the lights track the path of the sun throughout the day, and our bodies become attuned to that. As Tomas said, the costs are not prohibitive. The U.S. school districts spend $6 billion each year on energy, second only to their teacher salaries. Now, what if we could shift that? What if we could take more money and put it towards salaries and less on energy? We could pay our teachers better. We could retain better teachers, higher quality jobs. In this district, they spent $378 million in operational costs, and that's increased 3.4% over the last year. And they spend $2.2 billion in education and instructional. So you can see it's so important to begin to understand how we shift costs. As Tomas said, we have to work within an ed spec that the state provides, and that ed spec creates a student station. Tomas talked about it. Well, the funding that is directly equivalent to how many student stations you get. The funding for that school is tied to the number of student stations you have in that school. It's just simple math. And that's the amount of money they have to build. It's not always a lot. And so renewable energy hasn't always been accessible. And it's even harder in Florida because you can't exercise something like a power purchase agreement. And a school district can't come in and put solar across their schools here because and pay it back over time. It's not allowed. It's legislated that it's not allowed. So it has to be funded within the project budget or part of a service-based contract. And we know that over time, service-based contracts aren't as economical for the school district as another way to go about it. But Uncle Tomas or Uncle Mike can't come in and fund it for them. So it has to be done within the project budget. So we know on average that high-performance schools can use between 65 and 80% less energy. And so if we can really tighten up the energy use, we can put renewables on the roof, so we're not paying extra for structure, and we can offset our footprint. That's the goal. We know it doesn't take longer to build a zero energy school, right? In this case, the schedule was the critical path. It wasn't a part of the schedule, it was the critical path. We had 6 months to design a whole new learning type, a learning environment, and to make it zero energy within the building types and construction typologies they use here. And then they had 10.5 months to construct it. Now, if you ask the contractor, they really wish they had 15 months, but we did it. And we followed, we planned the work and we worked the plan. And we got input across a variety of stakeholders. EUI, the lower the better. So we'll just lay the definition out there for anybody who hasn't heard it. So EUI stands for energy use intensity, and is the measure of all of the energy used in a building You add all that up over 365 days, over a year. You divide it by the square foot, the floor area of the building, and it gives you a number. And all that's really important to know is that the lower the number, like a golf score, the better. So we don't want really high numbers. Hospitals, fast food restaurants are up in the hundreds. We need our AUIs much, much, much lower than that. So we study and we benchmark and we use experience to help us help us make decisions and guide us into setting UI. Nationally, the national EUI average 68 for school buildings, and I know that's shifting some. Energy Star just released new EUI data. The school district actually is not far off from that, and it's the way they acquire energy and the way they pay for it. Florida average is actually a little better. They're at 55 EUI. We set a rigorous goal of 23 for Neo City. We know that's a sweet spot in our experience for schools that we've designed in facilities. And it's important to remember that net zero energy doesn't mean zero EUI. It doesn't mean you're not using any energy. It means you're offsetting the small amount that you do use. And it's not just about solar panels, and I love this. We get these calls a lot. We got it from one of the largest school districts in Florida last year, and the superintendent called his facilities department and said, hey, we want to put solar panels on everything. We're going to be zero energy, and it's going to be awesome. And when they stopped freaking out, they started looking into, well, what does that mean? And what it means is, right, any building out here, out in space, can be zero energy ready, right? It is zero energy ready, any building, if you have a solar array big enough. So Tomas, if you go to the next slide, right? So do you have 300 acres and $300 million to build an array? Disney does, it's right down the street, right? But a school district in the middle of Florida does not. And as the case with most clients. Well, Neo City Academy, the one we're talking about here, it's expected to save, and Tomas, if you go to the next slide. Yep, back up one. Yeah, so Neo City Academy is expected to save the school district over $115,000 a year. So as Jerry Maguire would say, this is where show me the money, where the rubber meets the road. But less than a quarter of those savings are from solar panel production. So again, there's often some confusion. If I just put solar panels up, I'm going to make money. I'm going to offset my costs. 77% of those energy savings, that $115,000, are from the high performance building design. It's from reducing that energy use, that energy footprint first. So oftentimes, and this is what happened with Neo City, it was not moving forward from the beginning as a zero energy school. It was a zero energy ready school. So we were putting the infrastructure in, and during construction, if we had the ability to fund the PV in the budget, they were going to do it. But it means that schools, there's any variety of reasons why schools can't commit to solar panel production. It could also mean just using that money in other situations. But if we reduce that energy footprint, we see the bulk of our savings right there. So why not have every school be zero energy? One of the key components of this is to have an internal champion, right? So next slide, it's the Rocky Balboa. It's that iconic image, right? This is somebody with enough leverage in the system to clear hurdles. So when the facilities department shows up to these stakeholder meetings and they say, we can't use that new type of, that's a different mechanical system than we are used to. We can't do it. They say, look, we're making a shift here. You're going to get on board and we're going to make this work. And oftentimes what they find is that these buildings have systems with fewer moving parts. They're simpler to operate and maintain, and they embrace them. And they ask to have that move forward and the design requirements of the district. Data must also guide your decisions. This is so important. Today we have so much access to data, right? Our phones are telling us what our heart rate's doing every hour of the minute. It's logging it back to the year 1900. So we have all this data, we have to use it. We have to know how to use it, but we also have to use it effectively. And it means exercising a trade-off methodology. And so you're wondering why the Thunderdome for Mad Max is on the slide, because sometimes we have to get into the Thunderdome. And unfortunately, there's a lot less Tina Turner, and for a good reason, there's a little less blood, but we have to use the data because there's a finite amount of resources on every project, whether it be time, space, money. We can't have it all. And so we use the design drivers that Tomas and Mike talked about before, and we use those as a guide, and we use data from energy modeling to make the best trade-off decisions we can. So what does that mean? We do early shoebox models. We take simple concept forms. Tomas showed the iterative process on that, and we begin to plug in known values, data that we've taken from comparative projects on how building systems will operate. And what we find is that forms aren't always dictating. Like, we could build a big dumb box and it could be really tight and energy efficient, and really low use from an energy standpoint, but it could be worse learning environments. And we're doing that every day, right? But so we have to make trade-off decisions. We don't necessarily always choose the lowest EUI. We have to find that in balance with the design drivers. But we have to iterate and model. And we have to remember it's complex, it's not complicated. Admiral Grace Hopper said the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, we've always done it this way, so we're just going to continue doing that. So this is a cross-section of Neo City Academy, and you can see in it, we have a dedicated outdoor air system right in the middle of the building on the second floor, and it's decoupled from the heating and cooling system. So on nice days, today is actually a pretty nice day in Florida, we can just blow air, preconditioned air in, and that means removing some of the humidity. Oh, and while we remove the humidity, we're capturing that condensate and putting it back into the cooling tower for makeup water. So it's simple, low-tech moves that begin to save energy. But in this sense, the school district had never used distributed heat pump system. We'd love to couple it to a geothermal heating and cooling system, but that doesn't work in Florida. We can't get the ground cool enough to offset the heating loads of our buildings. But we did deploy a dedicated heat pump system, and these are about residential in size. There's 38 of them in the building, distributed through closets. And if you lose one of those, one goes down, you might lose a classroom instead of a whole zone or a whole wing. It also allows us to really tune how the building is heating and cooling itself. We know that air leakage plays a major role in energy loss for a building. So if we can ensure that the building air leakage rate is set and we feel comfortable that it meets those requirements, then we can right size the mechanical system. We can take out redundancy because the mechanical engineer knows that people aren't going to be hot or cold because all of their conditioned air is leaking out or they're having warm air infiltration, and we can reduce our footprint even further. But at the end of the day, right, this is a public school job. And so it's, we have to make sure that we're supporting the construction process and in understanding that we're using the methods and methodologies that the district uses in building construction. And so sometimes it elicits that response of that John Glenn felt when he was sitting on top of the Atlas rocket, and somebody asked him how he felt. He said, about as good as you feel knowing you're sitting on 2 million parts all built by the lowest bidder, right? So we spend a lot of money on our schools and our buildings. Why aren't we testing them and making sure they perform? And it doesn't have to cost a lot to ensure success, to ensure that we're bringing that person back from outer space, to ensure the building is meeting its energy goals day after day, year after year. And so detailing around the building in a building envelope has become more and more complex. Even just meeting energy code adds a complexity that we hadn't seen before. And so we have to help understand how sequencing might occur. And this drives my risk department nuts sometimes, but I draw the detail in the upper left hand. Well, what goes in first? And if a contractor's not as familiar with this type of system, he doesn't understand that the window system has to go in before the brick. And no mason loves to work above glazing. They don't want to break a bunch of glazing on the project. But if we don't get the window system in first, then we're not getting the air sealing that we need. So we help with sequencing diagrams. And we know that design is only 50% of the process. It has to get built as it's intended, or we haven't met the needs of the client. And so again, it's complex, it's not complicated. And this is something we talk about on the job site, right? So a Lego build, the final build from a Lego kit is complex, but if you follow those steps, it's not complicated. And that's all we're asking our construction partners to do. But we need to make sure that they understand everything that's going in that building. So we ask them to do coordination drawings. We require them to do coordination drawings. And one of the big reasons is that we can't always show everything that goes into the building development. For instance, sprinkler design is a performance-based design. That's done by a subcontractor, but sprinklers are one of the first things that go in a building. And so guess who's not moving when the ductwork comes along? The sprinkler guy, right? So we require coordination drawings to know that it won't hit and it will fit. That's a view looking down that corridor, main corridor of Neo City. Everything fit. We lowered no ceilings, and we're not causing distress in ductwork that we have to change and possibly impact airflows. We also need to help them understand sequencing. So we show things, the contract documents include both the drawings and the specifications, and there's things that are unique to both, information unique to both. And so in this instance at NeoCity, we helped the contractor create this diagram, and it was for the installation of the blue tape in the bottom right-hand corner. Well, that took 6 steps. And if you didn't know what was in the spec, you wouldn't know what those 6 steps were. You have to prime the wall. You have to use a weighted roller. That's not something I can show in my drawings. And so at the end of the day, the bottom left picture is what it should look like when it's done. So the GC has a way to QA/QC that. Another thing is it allows the subs to QA/QC their own work. So the drywall guy, when he walks up to cover up that joint, he knows exactly what it should look like. If it doesn't look like that, he's empowered to go find the superintendent and say, hey, something's wrong here. I don't think you want me to cover this up. But at the end of the day, in the words of Dali, have no fear of perfection because you're never going to reach it. This is a big building. It's a complex building. We have to embrace that, but we have to trust and verify, as Reagan famously quipped. And so do we QA/QC is everyone's job. So in this instance, they created a summary of step-by-step every installation sequence that needed to happen on that building. And it went up next to that window and they checked off after each step. And guess what? It worked. It was successful time and time again. We didn't have to uncover work because we're going to test this building, right? So in the next step, we say mock-ups are non-negotiable. So it's come to this perfect situation where over time I've developed mock-up after mock-up, and at this point we're developing 4-sided mock-ups. We have a roof, and this is every interconnection, every exterior detail that's occurring on the building on the mock-up, and then we pressurize it and we test it to meet the same air leakage rate as the building. And what we find is we work through the issues there. So anecdotally, on the left is that mock-up, right? So we have tilt wall, we have punched opening storefront, and where the black and metal lathe was stucco on sheathing. And what happened was we put that up, and the installers came out to the field, and so it's metal stud with sheathing and an air barrier, and then insulation. And they were supposed to stick the insulation up with stick pins. Well, they used spray foam adhesive. So when they ran the screws in for the metal lathe, the spray foam expanded and pulled all the screws out of the air barrier. We found that on the mock-up. We failed the first time we tested it. We found it, we fixed the situation, and we passed on the mock-up. And then we repeat those steps on the building.
So just to finalize, we'd like to share a few of the final results of the project. Number one, we were trying to really hit the 2030 challenge. And so the highlights for this project is that final EUI was a 76% more efficient than a typical standard school in Florida. That our infiltration came in at 0.03 CFM. That was kind of one of the tightest tested buildings ever recorded. That energy cost, estimated energy costs are coming at about $115,000 per year, or $3.2 million over 20 years. That we did have a 228 kilowatt array that we designed according to passive solar systems, and that we tied ourselves to sustainable strategies, as you can see on this kind of next slide, where we were again being addressing all the needs for a new urbanist environment, but within that, try to apply sustainable strategies, increasing tree canopy, having bioretention, kind of creating sustainable and regenerative designs, and mitigating heat island effect. And these passive design strategies we talked about too, how we oriented the building. We've formed the building to address solar orientation. We provided clear stories with a cowl wall for diffuse heating on south elevation, so we could get great light without the heat. Included light shelves where needed. Created solar canopies to shade the lighting, and importantly too, provided cross ventilation in every classroom, which can be a plus, especially now given COVID-19. And again, I guess as Philip was touching on, a lot of strategies from HVAC systems that are simple, yet provide a way to decouple fresh air from condensed air from cooling air, having sensors throughout the building, having high albedo materials in terms of the exterior skin on the roof, having zero penetrations or almost no penetrations on the roof, which is kind of the hottest surface, especially in the climate, and so on. So there were all kinds of strategies in which we were looking in order to kind of maintain the low EUI and a high performance component to this. And as Philip touched on, incredible curve for details to create high performance, supported by PV panels to bring it down to zero, bringing biophilia when needed, creating mock-ups that would test the building before it gets installed, so that we can work out the problems and the leaking, and then kind of this idea of a building dashboard that would tell the students how the building is performing throughout the day. So again, here's some pictures of the project, the canopies, again, producing 220 kilowatts of energy. A dashboard, I'm not sure, Philip, you want to touch on the dashboard real quick?
Sure. So we deployed an energy dashboard on this project, and it's accessible by everyone. The school uses it. What you're looking at here is the net energy use over the course of a month. So we sub-metered the systems in this building. So lighting, mechanical receptacles, the total building use, the solar array, and then we have a zero energy. And students are able to use that, and they roll this into curriculum. So we can look at it from the day, the week, the year. And it shows the current building demand. So I go in all the time and you can look at this, right, to see what the building's doing. It's a great tool that has possibilities we haven't even imagined.
Some data of the projects, 500 students that we've gone through this. The project was required through the specifications to meet a 0.15 CFM. And when it tested, it came up 0.03, so incredible improvement based on the skin and the mock-ups that Philip was touching on, and the importance to be extremely diligent working with contractors to design according and fabricate according to design. And again, the predictability for the ROI is for the high performance component to be about 6 years, and it costs about 5.5% of the project, and for the solar to be 9.5 years, increasing the cost about 9.3%. And again, what we've tried to create is this environment that is sustainable, that integrates design strategies for human health, energy, environmental stewardship, at the same time creating an immersive experience for students to learn for the future. And that's it for us. We'd like to hear from you, and we'll move on to the Q&A. And if you do have any questions for any of us, we welcome them. We would love to engage you on them. And here you have our emails and our contact info. Again, it's been a pleasure, and thank you, everybody.